Good day and welcome back to Elementary 72 Gaming. So this time we are up for one of the other crazy sections on the prelude and hopefully the entry to the Floor of Death. Now I did expect us to actually be a little bit further. I kind of overestimated the progression of the story. It really was too slow, but we will be kicking off from 231 up to 240, and I will catch you all in the next one after that when that time comes. So let's get into this one here and let's go to 231. So we start off with Quinn talking about his feelings with Evan again and uh, how he feels that the world would disappear if Baum was gone. And we see that he's afraid that Baum is going to outgrow them way too quickly. And we see that Evan basically explains that Baum is a shark and they are minnows. Minnows are very small little fish that clean the the fins of the sharks, and that is the way that it goes. And we see that Quinn decided he's going to follow Baum as far as he can for as long as he possibly can. And we see that the God of Guardians explains that if Baum learns this technique of black hole sphere, he'll be beyond all regulars. Because even the smallest amount of the black hole sphere can destroy a whole world worth of Shinsu. That's how crazy powerful it is. So we see that he asks the God of Guardians to attack him with it, and he says that he somehow will learn to cope with it, and he basically explains that he's willing to take it, and we see that the God of Guardians really thinks that he's something special. Then we go back to Misang and Wagnan, and uh, we see that Wagnan tells Misang that she's going to be released and she'll be allowed to go back to Casino, and basically explains that Misang should have nothing to do with Wagnan. We then see that Yuri has been training under Rossi, and it's been some crazy intense training for her as well. And then we see Baum takes a hit from the Shinsu Black Hole Sphere, which, as I said, could destroy an entire world of Shinsu. That's how dangerous it is. We then see that they arrive at another station, and we see that Misang basically says that she's leaving with Casino and that they should allow her to go through. And we see that she just walks right through and she leaves with Casino. And we see that basically Wagner gives Misang a little code word to use to talk to him, that he will be the Yellow Prince on Emily. And we see that Sachi and Boro decide not to mention what happened to Iwa, and that she could have been killed with the whole fight that happened outside the station, and that their team has gone through quite a bit. Then we see that Casino goes down, and we see that he's being tormented by what White told him. And we see that Cassino was told that Wagner could grant his wish if he helps restore Cassino. And we see that White and Rachel have a little fight. Then we see that Wagner joins them as part of their team. We then end up back with Baum in the God of Guardians training room, and we see that he is using a Shensu Black Hole Sphere. That's where episode 231 ends, and this is something big. Remember, we said that as he said, it's something crazy. It's so powerful that just describing it made it more powerful than a high ranker. And then we see Baum says he feels like his body has grown lighter, and we see that he's more confident that he can keep going even though he is in a very bad state. We then see that they're on the 42nd floor advancing test, and they enter the testing grounds, and we see that Baum is taking this test solo, at which point he destroys the Shinsu fish that were sent his way in an instant. And we see he passes his floor advancement test. We see that Kun Aguero Agnes also passes his test. And we see that Evan looks at him really weird, seeing that he's got good spear bearer techniques up his sleeves. We see Ender Rossi pass solo as well. And we see that Yuri basically is whining on her that there's more training to go. We see that the rest of them really struggled with the test. That's Hockney, Sachi, Boro, Barrow, and Idade. All of them put together struggled to pass the test at the same level that just the two, that is Kun and Baum, did on their own. Then we see that Hockney explains that he used to live on the floor of death, and that he's a native from the place, and basically they tried to convince him to join them on the floor of death. And we see that if you visit the floor of death, you just become food for those who live there. And we see that they start wondering what's going to go on. And we see that Sachi says that maybe Hockney was tricked to get onto the train to go after the piece of his picture. Then we see that Kun comes over and he talks to everybody, and they start wondering where Baum is. And then all of a sudden we see Baum arrive. And we see that they're wondering why Baum's face is such a mess. And we see that the princesses of Jahad are forbidden from approaching the floor of death. And we see that Evan has been to the floor of death since it's a pilgrimage for guides. So that means that Huardian also has a route for pilgrimage to this floor. And then we see that the light on the train starts fading as they enter the floor of death. And we see that Bam has this weird feeling that he's going to a place where he absolutely has to be. And we see that the night that it's setting continued for almost a month. And we see that they finally arrive to their destination with the stop on the floor of death. And we see the site of the floor of death. It's just this spiky terrain with the red flowing liquid, which is the blood of the administrator. And we see that Huardian explains there's no proper station, they're just going to jump straight off into the floor. And she explains that that isn't even the real floor of death, that's just the body of the dead administrator. And we see that White is surprised that he can leave the train too. And we see that on the floor of death, all contracts with the administrators and spells are basically nullified, they're neutralized. So White won't be bound to the train, so he can actually leave. And we see that Rachel basically plans with her team to deploy to the floor of death. White goes buddy-buddy with Wagner because he's finally getting off the train. And all of a sudden we see Karaka is wondering if it's time for him to get off. And we said it's time for him to head out again. And we see Yuri says, let's go. That's where episode 132 ends. And here are some crazy things to note about this section of the tower. This is where we're going to see Bam really start to show his stuff. And this is the point where he's too dangerous for a Renka to even fight. We then see that the regulars are all speaking on the train. And they're all freaking out about the fact that they have to jump. And we see that the liquid that is flowing below is the blood from the body of the administrator. And it's Shinsu itself, so you won't die even if you fall in it. And that you have to jump into the blood in order to reach the real floor of death. And we see that Evan explains that it's all right and that the sea that they're looking at is nothing more than the outer shell of the floor. And we see that he says that you won't be able to see the truth unless you jump down. And then we see Boro starts freaking out and all the craziness that goes on there. And basically, we see everybody's basically pushing Boro to jump. And we see that Hockney's full name is David Hockney. And we see Kun is looking at him like a mysterious, dangerous individual. And all of a sudden, we see Yuraha and Wagdan show up. And basically, they say that they're willing to trade some information with them so that they can leave. And then we see that basically Yura was worried that Yuri would get involved. I mean, Yuri said she wouldn't get involved, so they decide to do their whole little trade. And we see that Baum decides he'll take the offer and they listen to what's being said. We then see that Baum falls for one of the false pieces of information from Rachel, from Yura, and we see that Kun catches onto it, and he's like, something's not right. If Wagner really did escape, then why haven't they seen him? Plus, why would she go so far as to make a deal to tell us this kind of a thing? And we see that Kun realizes something must have happened to them. And we see that they give a bit of a clue about where it is. It's the place where three waterfalls flow, and the princess with the deep colored sea, right? And that's their only real hints that they give. So those are the two hints that they get. And all of a sudden, we see Karaka jump out of the train, and he's about to kill all of the regulars here. And he fires off a Shinsu black hole sphere, at which point Yuri starts fighting with him, and everybody starts going crazy. Then we see that he says he's an immortal, and we see Yuri hits him really hard at this point. And we see that Karaka decides to grab Wagnan and Yuraha. And we see that Karaka tries to grab Bam. At this point, we see that he can't dodge it, so he fires his attack to destroy Karaka's attack, which you should understand, it's high ranker versus regular. And then we see that Evan grabs him, and we see Karaka fades into his own attack, and he starts to disappear. And we see a moment later where Evan looks up at the Renka attack Karaka Shinsu, and he sees that it's disappearing into the attack that Baum launched off. And we see Baum is like, I'm still not nearly strong enough. And then we see that Evan has this really scared expression where he says, what on earth did he learn on the train? And there is something really important for you to know. Evan is a high ranker and he's freaked out about this power. And we see that he is really, really suspicious of the kid because he's growing at such an irregular rate, and he's a completely different type of monster from Yurik Mizuno. And he's thinking that he may not seem like he's so dangerous, but he definitely is way more dangerous than the other irregulars. And we see that Evan finally makes out that he's not going to be a proper immortal. Only Jahad and the 10 family leaders made a deal for immortality with the administrator. Now we know that's not true because there's one more person with a contract for immortality. That's Alan Grace, Baum's mother. So we know that there are 12 contracts for immortality. We don't know what B's contract was. We'll find out what he made a deal for later. And we see that everybody starts heading inside to the floor of death at this point. And we see that Hockney says they all have to go in at the same time. We then see some jokes about Boro being just a side character, and then he gets kicked in by Sachi. And we see that everybody starts diving in, and all of a sudden inside the liquid, we see that Balm hears a voice, and it starts calling him towards it. And as Balm heads that way, Hockney follows him to catch up to him so that he doesn't get separated from everybody, and they all end up entering into the outer section of the floor of death. And we see that everybody is sucked down into the next level, and we see that everyone is now on to the next part of the adventure. So we see everybody has fallen into the corpse of the administrator. We see that Yuri uses Shinsu to catch all the regulars, and then she puts them down safely. All of a sudden, she couldn't use her Shinsu when she was inside the blood of the administrator, and then finally everybody arrives. And we see that they also lost Waryun in that process, and everybody is now panicking and wondering what they're going to do. So there's a lot that goes on in this little part, and then all of a sudden we see that one of the small gatekeepers shows up with Kun and the rest of them. We see that Hockney and Balm are in a different place, and they wonder what they're going to do, when all of a sudden a gatekeeper shows up. And we see that the gatekeeper who shows up speaks to Hockney and explains that he knows him. And then we get a quick hint back to Iwa, and she's on a ship with Yurik Mizuno. Yep, Yurik freaking Mizuno, man. And that is where episode 234 ends. So let's get on to episode 235. And this is where the insanity is really going to take place. We see that Yurik is on his way to the floor of death. He has some stuff that he has to sort out. And we see that Danwa is awake, and that Iwa is actually healing. Her flame actually protected her from Yuri's attack. And we see that small protection that Iwa's power gave to protect herself and Danwa is what allowed them to be rescued. And we see that they don't know about Rak, and that Rak wasn't with them when they were rescued. And we see that they're worried that Rak died. We then get back to Hockney, and we see Hockney speaks to someone named Mata, and him and Mata have their little conversation, and Mata and Hockney are friends. And we see that Mata is piloting this big bug, and he's carrying Balm with him, and they decide they're going to go in through to the floor of death. And we see that Hockney says that he's going to South City. And we see that Hockney is being hunted by the ruler of the floor of death, someone named Haljo. And we see that basically he's in search of his photo, the red light that contains his soul. and we see that he must find the picture, and we see that all of a sudden um, they run up to a gatekeeper. No, it's not them. Oh, wait, no, they do run into a gatekeeper, and then we see Sachi's team also runs into a gatekeeper at the same time. And we see that Evan decides to allow the regulars to fight it at first. So basically, they say they should fight it. And they basically say they should go ahead and fight the monster. So we see that they decide to start fighting, and the first person up is Ender Rossi. She ends up fighting the big monster. She smashes it down quite easily, and she has her own special skill now, and she calls it a chiffon sword. It's actually the velvet sword from Yuri that she learned, and she calls hers a chiffon sword, and that's her attack. Then all of a sudden we see that the main component of the Guardian comes out, its main body, and at that point we see that Ender Rossi jumps out, and she decides to let the others fight it. And then we see that Kun deploys Anako, and at that moment we see that they're being spied on, and it says 7 intruders. The enemy took the bait. 2 of them are threatening, and basically they want to get rid of all of them. And they say call Richie Falwyn. That's one of the guardians of this floor. That's where 235 ends, and we end up on 236. So we see that they are fighting with Enakor, and we get a quick hint of how powerful Kun has become. And we see that the lighthouse split into pieces, and we see that Yuri asks Evan, what in the world did you do? And basically he explains that he thought Kun a trick that's well suited to him, because he's perfectly devious. And we see that basically Kun tells Boro to stand in the spot where he tells him to be, and he just starts using his technique of Anako. And then we see that the monster is going to attack him. And we see that all of a sudden Anako activates the Mystery Sphere. And we then see that the little piece of that Guardian starts moving, trying to escape, and it keeps getting teleported right back inside. And no matter how fast it moves, it keeps getting rerouted inside. And we see exactly what Anakor does. So Anakor splits the lighthouse up into multiple pieces, giving it the ability to calculate far more than it normally would. And basically it enhances it to a very high level. And we see that this is what Evan thought Kun, and he used a Class A upgrade kit that is actually illegal, called the Enacor upgrade kit. And basically he explained that it's illegal and expensive, and that if he got in trouble he'd simply say that Judy made him do it. And basically the whole reason why Evan did this was they need a light bearer to help back them up, and they figured that Kun could be their light bearer because he has enough potential to do it. And we see that Kun decides to change the mode of the crystal, and he tells Boro to stand in place and just put out his needle, and the moment the Guardian hits the needle, it gets killed instantly by Boro. We then see that Hockney's friend destroys the Guardian that they were fighting, and they end up killing the main body even faster with their skills, and they end up moving on. And we see that basically to enter the floor of death, you have to give up your soul. And we see that Mata explains that he'll try and help them in. And then all of a sudden, we see that Balm is awake. We see that the final gatekeeper is another type of special gatekeeper. And basically, Hockney and Mata try to deceive it. And Hockney tries to keep Balm quiet so that the gatekeeper doesn't notice them. And then all of a sudden, we see that this chapter ends with them saying that the gatekeeper will take away their souls. That is where 236 ends. Let's get to 237 because things are about to get very interesting. At this point, we see Yuri and the rest of the regulars walking in. And we see that the living ignition weapon beta is what is allowing Enakor to work for Kun at the moment. Because the calculating load is too much for him to handle on his own. If it wasn't for beta being inside there, they couldn't do this here. And then we see that they all of a sudden attacked by a gigantic stag beetle, and this fight is going to be much different. Then we get back to Balm and Hockney with Mata, and basically we see that they explain the way that things go. So there's Watchmen, who are the first gatekeeper that you fight off. They are generally followed around by eye bugs, and last you get the leeches. So each of them are different, and the bugs are totally soulless, so you can't destroy them. And then we see that Mata isn't allowed in. And we see that the Guardian says that he already knows that there are two people with souls inside there that are not allowed, and they just need to hand over their souls to the Divine Fish. The Divine Fish are called Soul Devourers, and we see that Hockney and Balm go up, and they decide they'll hand over their souls to go in. And we see they talk to the Guardian and they said, okay, fine, they'll hand it over. He says his name is David Hockney, and Balm gives his name the 24th Balm. And you see that their souls need to be handed over. We see that the soulfish go and they grab Hockney's soul and take it out. And when they grab Balm, we see tons of souls start pouring out of him. And we see that the Guardian decides that Balm is a monster. And we see that Balm is contemplating saying whether he's a regular. And he says it's just an ordinary regular, and he'll leave his soul, provided he can keep all the other souls safe. And then we see that the Guardian deploys one of its defensive techniques. And we see Balm deploys the Thorn, and all of a sudden, we see that he's being tested, and he fires an attack at them. And we see Balm uses the Shinsu black hole sphere to smash it, and he throws it up the center of the bamboo spear, and it instantly shatters. And we see the Guardian is like, whoa, this guy is crazy. And we see that the Guardian analyzes Balm. So Balm has the soul of several people within his body. He uses a mysterious kind of Shinsu, and he's an extremely suspicious intruder. He cannot be allowed any further. And then we see that all of a sudden a message comes through. The gatekeeper needs to stop and let him in, that Garam has allowed him into the city. We then see that Yuri is fighting and struggling with the stag beetles, because every time she kills them, they just keep coming back over and over again. We then see that Garam is leading Balm towards her, and she is the princess of the deep colored sea. And we see that she's going to meet the boy, and she leaves on her own for that purpose. And we see that she explains that Enryu once came here and he killed the Guardian. And she's wondering if that boy could change everything in this place as well, just like Enryu did. So we move on from 237 to 238. And we see the Guardian basically looks at Balm, and he says, this is the first time since Yurik Mazzino entered that anybody is being entered into the floor. And after this year, we see that he's granted access and they'll be allowed to keep their cities. And we see that they're given a limit that they can only stay in the floor of death with their souls for 1 week. If they're here any longer than that, they will become prey for the dead. So basically, that's how things are being explained to them. We then see that Mata has taken them up into the passageways leading into the actual floor of death. And we see that Mata starts speaking to Hockney, and he's like, basically saying that Balm is totally weird. It makes no sense that the final gatekeeper would let him pass, and that he seems like he's extremely dangerous. And we see that Mata says that he's still alive and he was allowed into the floor of death, and that's why he thinks he's a good person, and don't be too suspicious of people for no reason. And we see that Mata goes on about Hockney making friends with Balm, and basically that's the way that their whole craziness goes. And all of a sudden, we see Garam Jahad show up inside the parasite. And we see that she basically explains that's why two princesses of Jahad must be following him. And we see that Garam explains that Balm is a lot different than what she expected. She expected him to be much similar to Yurik. And we see that Garam takes over the Guardian that they were and starts moving away. Then we see that Yuri and Evan keep running away from the leeches, and Yuri starts using some crazy attacks against them. All of a sudden, a red witch shows up and aids them to get away from the Guardians. And we see that they have arrived at North City of the Floor of Death. At this point, we see Garam jumps out, Balm, Hockney, and Mata join her. And then we see that Garam decides to use flying creature and that they're going to keep following her. And Hockney has decided to follow Balm. And we see that they start moving on the next creature and they start flying around. At this point, we see that Garam says that she wants to talk to Balm. And we see she introduces herself. She says she's Garam Jahad. And she explains that she went missing with 2 of the 13-month series. And we see that Balm remembers the clue that Yuraha gave. And we see that she explains that she betrayed the Jahad family and she went into hiding. And she explains that she found out why there's so much of fighting between the princesses selected and why they can't rise to a higher position and what kind of person Jahad truly is. And it's all because of the existence of Balm. And we see that she offers Balm to learn about himself. And we see that she says that she'll enlighten Balm on his true reality, but he has to take responsibility for what he learns. We then see the Red Witch leading all of the other party to a safe place. And we see that Yuri basically says that she's feeling like replacing the Grey Dwarf she has with Red Witch. And basically, the Red Witch says that she's going to ask them for a favor. And we see that they basically explain that they're going to need Yuri to kill Haljo and get rid of him from this place. And then we pass over to Haljo in South City and we see that he's busy reading comics, and that's where 238 ends. And we see that Garam says she's only going to give Balm a very small part of his story. And she basically goes on and she explains that if she had to say too much right now, he might not be able to handle it and it would ruin him. And we see that she starts it off with, how much do you know about King Jahad? Now I'm actually going to follow a bit about what she says about Balm. I'm actually going to read it phrase for phrase. We then get Karaka dropping off the other regulars. We see Yuraha, Wagner and the rest of them entered into the Floor of Death without passing by the Guardian through a secret passage. We see that Yura is worried that if Karaka is after the thorn, there's no way they can get it. And we see that Wagner notices the ring on Karaka's finger. We then get Yuri speaking to the Red Witch and being explained the task that's been given to her, who she's going to have to kill and what's the favor. We see that they explain the whole Dija and Disha story in a very small method. Yeah, so we see that the whole rebellion that happened on the floor was explained and how things go. And we see that she explains that Haljo helped Fug get a hold of thorn fragments, and he's the one who's responsible for sending the thorn fragment that's on Balm's back. So that's how it goes. And we see that as far as they know, 3 thorn fragments have been released into the tower. So we know that 3 thorn fragments are out there in the tower. 1 from those 3 is on Balm's back. 2 are unaccounted for. And we see that they say that there's a finer fragment left on the floor of death. We then see that Evan says, "How could you accept such a suspicious request?" And Yuri says, "Well, who else would lead the way? That's the only person who can, so we have to do whatever to get to where we want to go." And we see that at this point he switches over to Haljo and is basically being told that Karaka is coming. And we see that a whole lot of craziness is happening at that point, and basically Haljo is going on about something about their deal, and that Karaka said that he'll help them get out of the floor of death. We see that Hockney is the one who discovered the thorn fragment that's on Baam's back. We see that everybody in Haljo's court is basically getting ready for the arrival of Karaka. And we see that Karaka arrives in the castle with Haljo. Then he starts heading straight for Haljo. He enters into the chamber. And we see that Karaka and Haljo have a little talk. Haljo walks down to Karaka and he says that the deal they made with Fug is to leave this place, and all they have is TV with a single channel, and it only has the news channel, and it's not even fun anymore because there's no news about Enderos. And we see that Karaka basically has a little joke here. It's not really important, but we get the whole idea what they're fighting about. And we see that at that point, Haljo explains that there's somebody, not Haljo, sorry, Karaka explains that there's someone who can get them out from here. And then we get back to Baam, and it's a question, how much did you know about King Jahad? And we see Baam says he never met him, he's only heard things. He knows that he's an irregular. So we get the story. He entered the tower as an irregular, climbed the tower with the 10 great family leaders, and made a deal with the administrator to become the king of the tower. An immortal body, a commander of powerful Shinsu, an enemy of Fug. That's what Baam knows about him. And we see Garam says that's right. He's a great king who attacked the tower and made a deal. An invincible warrior praised by everyone on all 134 floors of the tower. Having endlessly climbed the tower, he took pity on the people in the tower and decided to become the king of the tower. Since then, he decided to leave his attack on the tower to his descendants. But perhaps because his blood is so strong, he could not create a child with any woman. So Perbert Augustang, one of the 10 great leaders, proposed something, selecting outstanding female children, gradually injecting them with Jahad's blood, and making them compete with each other to climb the tower, to make the most talented of the surviving princesses of Jahad his wife. This is how the Princesses of Jahad began. The 13-month series weapons that they have are tokens proving that they are acknowledged princesses. Whichever princess gathers all 13 months can become Jahad's wife, but no princess has managed to do so. This is the story of Jahad and his princesses that has been passed down for ages. But the reality is different. The first Jahad princesses were consumed by the evil magic of the 13 months and ended up hating and killing one another. When the competition got more intense, the relation between the family leaders also became distorted. Back when she was chosen, even the original goal, a solution had disappeared. It was just pure competition and murder. Ultimately, the princesses of Jahad developed into a fight amongst the families that will never be resolved. Every day, their lives consisted of trying to slash the throats of their fellow sisters. It was too hard for her to endure that chaos. So we see that Garam was explaining, and it went on for just about forever. And then there was a princess. Her name was Ana Jahad. She was one of the ultimate descendants with the blood of two leaders mixed within her. With her colorless December, she was truly overwhelming. She displayed talents that even the feuding leaders had no choice but to acknowledge. Right at the moment when it seemed like she would end this cruel competition, she went insane. Having had gone mad, she murdered everyone from the Jahad family who crossed her path. Ultimately, she was trapped in a mysterious labyrinth, and she couldn't believe that the girl whom she had admired so much had ended up like that. So she risked her life to break in there and meet her. And that's where she heard it, the secrets from Jahad. So the very start, King Jahad never actually intended to get married. The reason he created the princesses of Jahad was actually to wipe out people's immediate complaint. The incident in the past, which all the first princesses of Jahad died, was also a tragedy manipulated by Jahad behind the scenes. And Jahad knew about that and went to question him, but all she heard were cruel secrets. Actually, even Jahad had a first love whom he could not forget, a first love that her name was Arlen Grace. She is the person who caused the whole tragedy to begin, and the one who brought Palm into the world. So that is 239, and we're on to 240. I know that this is crazy, but this is the most crazy part of the story. So we see the whole story of Arlen comes out, and basically we see Balm saying that he's heard that name somewhere before, and that's the name that Fa gave him, Grace. What does she mean that she's the one who brought him into this world? We see Balm asks Garam if that's his mother, and we see that Garam says she can't exactly call her a mother. She's been here longer than Garam has, so she's not sure about the exact details, but what she is sure is that she played a crucial role in bringing him into this place. And she was one of the irregulars who entered the tower along with the 10 great family leaders. But there were only 10 family leaders. That wasn't true. There used to be 13 of them, although there are only 11 now. And we see that is why the 13-month series is 13 pieces that make up one. And then there must be a separate reason for splitting the key into 13 pieces, and it's natural that the 13 months, that's the reason for the 13 months. So the 13 months were split up so that Jahad and his 12 companions could share the key. One of them is Arlen Grace. There were originally supposed to be 12 leaders, not 12. And she said a hidden irregular. She didn't believe that she existed, even when Anne mentioned her existence. She figured that it probably was a delusion created by her insane mind. And then she basically handed over the evidence, the pocket of Arlen Grace, and that is what she has with her. She explains that Arlen kept a diary of what happened to her when she was in the tower, and that she was a real person, and that she fell in love with one of her companions, who she compassionately called V. So basically, she explains that the name Viol probably came from the same person to whom Balm was born from. He was a warlord whom Lazlek, the current head of Pug, once served. So we see a lot was confirmed here, and we see that the whole story of the fight between Jahad, Arlen, and V occurred. We see that Jahad proposed to Arlen, and she rejected him because she was in love and engaged to V. And when she refused Jahad's proposal and ran away with V, the two of them formed an organization which opposed Jahad and started a war in order to steal the key which Jahad had, and that also enraged Jahad. And we see this is the whole story that started it. And eventually they had a child who was born. And we see Baum asks if that child was him and says no. That child was murdered by Jahad. And that drove Arlen Grace insane. And she put a spell to preserve the infant's body. And she figured that she could resurrect the infant if she got out of the tower somehow. And she even tried to commit suicide several times, but she was immortal, just like the other 10 leaders, and couldn't. But B was different for some reason. He didn't appear to have made a deal for immortality, and unable to stand the sight of Arlen losing her mind, he took his own life. And that is how everything happened at that point. But Arlen did not return to the 10 leaders and Jahad when B died. Instead, she tried to find a way to escape from the tower and wandered the tower alone for a very long time. So yeah, that's the whole story. And that's finally the way that it was, because she found her way out of this place. A place without Jahad and the administrator. And then she went on to have left Baum's body for the god of the tower to awaken and inhabit. And basically, the prophecy that was left was the child will open the door to this tower and return someday. He shall achieve vengeance for her love and finish the war which they had started with his own hands. He shall destroy corrupt power and bring truth to the tower. And God's messenger shall place the red thorn in the child's hand. That child shall use the red thorn to cut the throat of the greedy king, and he shall find the hidden key and open the door and lead everyone to greater heights. And we see that Karam says, "You are the child in that prophecy, Juvial Grace." So we see the whole story of the 10 great families and what really happened in the past, or just a fraction of it, because we do know that there's still a lot more. We then get a quick throw to Rachel, White, and the rest of her team as they're all getting ready to get themselves in place. We see that White has a fight with Karaka, and Karaka basically speaks to him in private about something crazy. We then see that the whole craziness between Rachel and Wagner happens, where he tries to insult her that she is trying to keep neat. And we see that Rachel explains that Baum is really a nice person and she's a really bad person. And we see the whole craziness go on there while they're talking to each other for a few seconds. And we see that she wants to sleep under the blue sky with countless stars. And that's what she wants for herself. That's her dream. And we see her saying in her head, "Arlene, I don't care what Baum is to you. She's the one who will complete the legend and make the thorn her own to make her wish come true. It has to be her." So we see that White and Karaka are talking, and Karaka explains that there's a soul room on this floor with countless souls, and it even includes the souls of rankers. And if White gathered it, would it give him his full power again? And then we get a quick hint to Haljo, and he basically decides he's going to play a crazy trick on everybody. And we see that he's going through everything with the rest of his individuals, and he decides to make an announcement. We then see Yuri and Evan's team as they start heading off into the the gallstone of the Guardian. And we see that Waryun shows up, and this is where this part is about to end. We then get Baum and Karam talking to each other, and we see that she explains that this isn't everything, and that later, when he needs more information, he can learn the rest of the story. And we see the whole story of Enryu is explained here. he appeared one day in the tower and turned the Shinsu red, and he is the messenger from God who came to deliver the thorn for Balm. And that is all we get on this section, one of the most important parts of the tower. So yeah, I actually don't have to explain anything because I actually went through the key part here, which was the whole story of the 10 great families and the fact that they're actually the 13 warriors. All of that was the key part. So I hope that you all did enjoy. This is one of the most important parts of the entire comic, and I will catch you all in the next one in episode 241. So see you all then and have a good day. What did I warn you?
Don't make noise. There's something. Wait, why did you?
I told you that this is going to be a long one. And was it long? Was it long?
Yep, 1 minute.
Next one is going to be even more crazy because I finally get to speak Enryu. I made a 1 hour 45-minute video on Enryu once and I didn't ever put it up.
Then what happened to it?
I never put it up.
So don't you still have it?
No, I deleted it. It's